all. So good to be with you all. I know this is the second best option that we have currently. The best option would have been to be in front of you, and but we'll work with what we have. And what excites me this morning, well, this evening there, is that as Sam had said earlier, the excitement and the eagerness to learn, the expectation you have is going to be the steps towards your growth in leadership and my growth in leadership. So there's always an expectation within me that I want to grow. I wish this was an interactional session where we could hear from you as well, rather than just download some information. And we'll try to, find some time for that. But I want to first introduce my friend, Mr. Sam Tevanayagam, a wonderful person, a philanthropist, but a business leader, a sharp business leader who, he can tell his story, but who has come from the ground up and built 3 organizations, 3 companies where he employs, close to 150 employees, I think, somewhere along that line, and has not just employ people, but also lead them to become leaders. In other words, invest in their life, not just in building their total capacity, rather than just, you work for me and I give you some money. So which is why I thought this is very, very congruent with the topic we have today. And the disclaimer I want to make before I introduce him is that nothing is worth, if you take this information and if you drop it, it's an absolute waste of time. But if you take this information and apply and hold each other accountable, okay, we have heard these things, what is something that we can take away from this and implement in our lives, and form maybe small groups within your colleges and say, we're going to practice this, and I want, maybe groups of 4 or 5, and call it leadership roundtable. Come together and talk about these things and how you can improve and sharpen each other. Otherwise, I don't believe in seminars, because it can do nothing if if those who participate in it don't apply. And that's true for me. That's true for all of us. So let me introduce my friend Sam Tevanayagam, and I'll let him share a little bit about himself.
Yes, good evening. As I was getting ready for this conference, I was thinking about the word 100-fold. One of your academies is called 100-fold. And I would like to ask the question, what comes to mind when we think of the word 100? Many of you are educators. For somebody who's grown up playing cricket, 100 or a century, right, is a match-winning score. In education, right, it means a perfect score, right? It means opening up opportunities for greater good, right? I believe in Shillong there is an IIT, right? As soon as students start to get 100, you're thinking in terms of, man, this person is going to be top of the class, and there's going to be opportunities. Nothing's going to stop them. You think in terms of quality, right? When you think in terms of 100, right? That is again perfection, right? You start to think about excellence. It doesn't matter where you grow up in the world, that word 100 means a lot. And as we think in terms of education, I believe that most of you or all of you on this conference call are educators. And there has been some research done in the US, especially with regard to a lot of the racial tensions that the US has gone through in the last so many months. And there are people who are starting to figure out, hey, what does it take in order to create transformation in society? What does it take to create transformation in communities? And what we are finding out is that there are 4 things that are transformational for individuals and for communities. And the 4 are education, employment, healthcare, and last but not least, a place to live. I'm going to say that one more time. Education, a job, healthcare, and a place to live. And this evening, as I talk to educators, it is one of the most transformational things that a person can go through, right? Because that is not something that can be taken away from that person. See, when you have education, right, nobody can take that away from you. And so not only is it an equalizer, right, with regard to life and opportunities, it transcends things like race. It transcends things like creed. It transcends things like caste. And so the beautiful thing is, I want to commend you for choosing a life in education. And today, as we talk a little bit more about leadership, all you're doing is starting to tweak your career. You're starting to look at things like, hey, how do I get better at this? How do I keep doing what I'm doing? So I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to the next 2 hours.
Thank you, Sam. That's a beautiful word to start. That's a great word. So you're going to hear a lot of wisdom from Sam. I'm a conceptual thinker, so I love the concepts. I love playing with, stimulating the intellects of people. But Sam actually truly applies that. I'm an educator myself, so I feel very much at home with all of you. I think one thing that is strongly common with Sam and I is the fact that we both love cricket. We both played for our schools, and I played a little bit in college. I'm trying to play that here until about 10 years ago. I'm 56 years old now. I can't even bowl an over without having body aches. So, but then we want to inspire leadership through cricket, and maybe that's in another forum. We can talk about it. But all with this one thought in mind: how can we invest in people, not just giving them concepts, but giving them the tools to grow as a person? And so let me begin the talk, and I'll invite Sam in to talk about applicationally. But let me share with you a PowerPoint which I'll be using as a guide to talk to you all. So the question I want to ask is, every one of us have a leadership identity. And the question that I want to place before you is, do you know who you are? Do you know who you are beyond your position, beyond your title as a principal of a college, as an assistant professor or professor? Is it merely restricted to the realm of your organizational influence, or does your influence extend beyond that? And I think there's not one person here who does not want to grow in influence and grow in leadership, because that's how we measure significance. And significance is really not a sum of all the success that we have had in life, but it's something beyond. It's really living up to our full potential. And so I want to introduce to you an idea that leadership is formed. So the old idea that leaders are born has already been thrown out, 100 years ago. But I think now this is what the hope that we all have, that we can grow and be reformed. It's like the picture that comes to my mind is the picture of somebody who is on a potter's wheel, being placed on a potter's wheel like a clay that can be molded again. So we're trying to understand how we can be reformed again. Maybe many of you have already been our transformational leaders, and this could be, you're just getting some conceptual framework to it. But there's still, transformational leadership is a lifelong journey. And, there are things that I look to Sam, and there are things that he looks to me. And mutually, we are sharpening one another as we work together. So every one of you today have been formed. Now we want to find out how we have been formed. We have been formed through nature. In other words, nature has given us certain genes in our DNA that can help us, that can become a resource for us, that works for us to become better leaders, to be a leader. Because every one of us are leaders, and especially if there's any women in the audience, I think I saw a few. Women are leader makers, through their nurture of their children, and hopefully, dads, we are also part of that. So nature forms us, but it's also nurture in the families that we have grown in. So nature, nurture, and culture, I think, are the three ways that our identity and and our leadership identity is shaped by. So I don't want to spend time here talking about how our bodies are formed to bring out the leadership elements in us, but nurture certainly has. If I can stop and ask you, and the fact that we're not in person together, this is really not possible, but to think of a person who has influenced your life greatly. If you can think for a moment, a person in your life whom you deeply, deeply admire because of their influence in your life. And I am pretty sure there's certainly somebody in your family, there's somebody in your friendship network, maybe somebody in your community or in your culture, in the Khasi culture or the other culture. I don't know, but somebody in your faith tradition, somebody who has influenced you during a time of crisis in your life, somebody who was there with you, or events that have inspired you or motivated you, achievements. All these have contributed to become to in our lives to become who we are today. And we are therefore, even the pain, maybe the setbacks you've been through, has shaped you as a person, because you learned something. As John Maxwell says, if you learn something from a failure, you're not failing, you're failing forward. In other words, it's a stepping stone towards a better person and a better leader. If we can learn from our failures and from the painful events, crisis in our lives. So leadership identity is also shaped by our culture. And as you can see, I look for a picture of the culture of Meghalaya, and I know there are some people outside of that, so welcome as well. But I just want to talk about in South Asian culture, leadership is often perceived is critical because there are certain things that I would say I don't want to say as negative things, but these are some of the challenges that we face. There's a social and power distance. Social and power distance based on our caste, based on the stratified nature of our society, and there's and it's attributed sometimes to positions in leadership, titles we hold, and it's power dominated. It's not empowering. It's not a naturally empowering environment for us. So transformational leadership is very critical because we want to empower others, and we'll talk about that later. But I just want to present that idea that culture sometimes brings more challenges towards overcoming the type of leadership we are talking about, or for embracing such a approach to leadership. The other challenge we have before us is the globalized culture that we live in. Military analysts say that we live in a VUCA world, and I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with that. The volatile nature of our societies today, the uncertainty that is there, and COVID is the best scenario of that. So many things were uncertain, and it's moving towards a little more certainty as vaccines are coming out. The complexity as the result of our globalized interfacing of cultures that were kind of tribalized and that was in corners of the world. Now they're all coming, and sometimes they clash, and sometimes they make us better, and there's an ambiguity. So volatility refers to the speed and volume. So we, as many of you know, as educators, we are always progressing, and you differentiate progress through speed and through volume. If you notice how the pace of everything has increased momentum, speed, faster. Computers are getting faster and faster. Our communications are getting faster and faster, and therefore, volatility is there. There's change, quick change. That's what it really means. Change is a constant today in our culture. Because of that complexity, uncertainty occurs when there is no concrete trend. So you can't even do strategic planning these days for 5 years, because the culture, the market is constantly changing, and you got to keep adjusting and tweaking. And I know Sam can talk about that. Complexity. Complexity describes the amount of different states. It's not a simple structures anymore. It's even an organizational structure is much more complex these days because of the way we are stratified, and all these cause tensions in relationships. You think about the VUCA idea in a family, because of the complexity of the nature of the roles that parents are playing today, how that has affected our families, our relationship with our children, and especially if you have lived outside of Meghalaya, or if you lived outside of the places that you're born and moved into a different culture or a subculture, the difficulties in forming relationships and keeping relationships. But I think all of us would agree that the most essential currency, the most valuable thing in our life is our relationship. Our relationship with our spouses, our children, our colleagues at work. This is what gives meaning to life. And these relationships are based on one single currency called trust. Trust. There are problems we face because of the breach of trust in relationship. Every problem that you think of, you realize somewhere it is a breach of trust. So what got me into this, I would say, thinking about transformational leadership, is that breach of trust is happens in families. We have so many divorces today, and so many families are broken. My own grandfather in the 1920s, growing up in the city of Kerala, I was raised in Chennai, but in the 1920s, actually they say he was a very rich man, and yet he left his home. He broke the trust with his wife, and in the 1920s that was unheard of. In fact, they say that when Mahatma Gandhi came to that part of the thing, he was rich enough. He was the only person who had a car to take him, to invite him into this town. But he left the family, and because of that, my dad was affected, and so not just in families, we see that in business leaders. And one of the personal experiences I had was trusting a lot of my savings in a bank in Sri Lanka. I trusted the leaders there to invest my money well. It was a reputable institution, one of the premier institutions in Sri Lanka. My wife, by the way, is a Sri Lankan. So that's we were working in Sri Lanka at the time and put all our money into that, almost $35,000. And during the 2008, the crash of the market, financial market, we lost it all because the board of directors had taken it, investors' money, and invested in Australia and other places. So you lose trust in institutions. Religious leaders, and I can go on talking about, how people have broken our trust. Leaders whom we trust to give us spiritual guidance, we let us down, or educators. I know once I was in college, we had a painful experience. A professor whom I loved in Australia had a failure, and it was a Christian institution, unfortunately, and that moral failure hit me very hard as a young student. Or political leadership, some of you know what's happening. Well, it's happening in India, it's happening in the United States right now. That how political leaders fail us, and I'm really talking about the corruption in the election that has happened. And it's very sad. I don't know about you. These things affect me. I know Sam and I have had several conversations about that. It is very sad when we see that in that high level of leadership, there's something that's not right. Why? That trust is built on integrity, which is the commitment to the whole person. So you're not breaking yourself into a person who is different at work and who is different at home. We are one person, body, spirit, soul, mind, especially. And so the integrity to that is so important so that we can be the same people, whether we are in a classroom, whether we are in an office, or whether we are at home, or with our friends. It's the biggest freedom that we can have, is to be the same person and to know that, that we can offer good to others. So our mind needs to be nourished on goodness so that everyone loves happiness, peace, joy, patience, compassion, and contentment. We want to be content. We want to be compassionate people. So our mind needs to be thinking in a certain way. Our body needs to be exercised, stretched and worked out, so that the toxins can be removed and aligned to be healthy. Systems needs to be nourished. Our spirit needs to be renewed and trained to make good choices, because the human spirit is where determination rests. I will do this, I will do that. It is the power to exercise good choices. But it needs an anchor. It needs somewhere we are anchored in goodness, in our being, in our essence. So what is transformational leadership? It was first coined, the term was actually coined by James Downton. But he was a sociologist, but that term was most popularized by James McGregor Burns in his book Leadership. So what he was trying to study was a different approach to seeing the interaction between a leader and a follower. So most of the leadership at the time, until the time, was transactional, meaning it's a leadership based on reward and punishment. So the relationship for you as a leader is the transaction between students and you, or if you're a principal, the staff and you. And so instead of looking at the person and saying, what are the characteristic traits of a person that makes him a good leader, James McGregor did some research on what happens in the interaction between the leader and the follower. He tried to integrate that, and he came to a conclusion that it's really not, leadership is simply not just vested in position, power, or privilege, prosperity, or even authority. I mean, of course, when you take up a position as a principal, obviously you have the authority of the board of trustees to function in that level of leadership. But sooner or later, we have to, it's a borrowed authority. It's not something that, we can say we have earned it, but we earn the right to the position, but we don't have leadership authority that it's vested from the trustees into your hands. And if you're a professor, that's the same thing. The principal and the board of trustees give you borrowed their authority, the name of the institution, all that is vested. And as a professor in that position, you have borrowed authority and given a certain period of time to earn it from the students. Because ultimately, if our leadership is just going to be based on our position, that's just a very basic level of leadership. But we want to earn, the permission to lead others. And it's usually for a professor, it's the students, and they give you the permission to lead them. And but I don't want to talk about the levels of leadership. But just to say this, that transformational leadership is really not simply the positional leadership that we have as a person, but rather, he said, it was a dynamic relationship between the leader and the follower that produces change. Transform means something that has been formed is now changing. Something in our lives is changing for the better. And that excites me because we can become better people, we can become better educators, we can become better human beings, and we can have a good influence in the lives of others. Think about metamorphosis. Many of you know, some of you are science professors. Metamorphosis is really the Greek word for change, morphing, changing. The small steps towards changes. Notice that there are at least 2 or 3 stages that are missing here. Probably the larva stage before it becomes a caterpillar. Ugly looking larvae becomes a reasonable looking caterpillar, and then it becomes a pupa with like a cocoon. And it's in the struggle of, they say that the beautiful butterfly is born out of struggle. In the way it develops its wings is tremendous amount of activity that goes on inside that finally erupts the cocoon, and it comes out with the wings that is powered now to fly. And it's beautiful, and it brings joy into our world, as little as a creature that begins almost like an ugly one. and so that is what transactional leadership is about, the change from inside that becomes so attractive that it inspires people, something within us that inspires people to become better themselves. So the model was actually promoted by an industrial psychologist, Dr. Bernard Bass, who really took the transformational leadership seriously and said, well, it's really a continuum. In other words, laissez-faire leadership, as you all know, is no leadership. Whatever happens, happens. Que sera, sera. Whatever happens, happens. So there's no leadership. It's not a good state to be in, a laissez-faire leadership. But transactional leadership, again, is every form of leadership that we see in society today, whether it be parental, whether it be a boss, an employee and an employer, whether it be a doctor and a patient, whether it be a teacher and a student. It is all businesses. It's all transactional leadership, which is based on, you do for me, I do in goods and services, exchange of goods and services. Kind of bartering, I would say. On the other hand, transformational leadership, he argued, is the other side of continuum that we want to grow into. Is the ability to change, is the commitment to change oneself before they lead others. And that's what we want to talk about. The desire to change from within so that we can be a positive influence in the lives of others and also create the transformational change in others. So one person at a time, if we can invest in, we are able to change the society. Imagine if 1 million people would do that and want to become a positive influence in the society. Humanity can achieve, poverty can be removed completely from the face of the earth. Everybody could, there is room for everyone to be prosperous, to be So he argued that transformational leadership, leaders are those who think about their own deep-rooted values. They transcend their own self-interest for the sake of the common good of the team. They move to address the higher level needs. So if we are simply, as this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as many of you would know this, these are things that motivate us. Generally these are things that motivate us. The needs that motivate us, first of all, is we want food. We want food. Food, shelter, and clothing, and the other needs. Like the sexual needs, the needs that are coming out of a physiological body, and the needs that to survive. The second need, once that is met, Then you think about safety needs, personal security, employment, resources. At this point, you're thinking about that because it can sustain the lower need. You're not thinking of employment to fulfill you or anything. You're working for a paycheck. We are working for a paycheck. But then there's higher needs, and then that's love and belonging needs. We need friendship, social needs. So not just physiological needs. We have not just psychological needs, but we have social needs to have friends because they add value to us. Family, a sense of connection, gives meaning to our lives. And then you move up higher, which is your identity need, esteem. I need to be respected. Who am I? In the midst of 7 billion people, am I standing out? Do I have the recognition? So until, finally self-actualization is really the purpose behind why you are alive today, you and I. We want to live to fulfill our purposes. So transformational, I'm sorry, I wish we could have this interaction, but I want to move faster so that I want to give time for Sam and talk with I'm just presenting you the conceptual framework of the difference between transactional leadership and transformational leadership. Transactional leadership focuses on the exchange between the leader and follower, as I said, based on reward. You work for me, and I will give you salary. You work on my assignments, and I'll give you a grade. So that's the motivation. The motivation for them is to score 100 so that they can move on. Here's the difference. So when I teach several courses on leadership. It doesn't matter how wicked they are. It doesn't matter if they are a criminal. If they write the answers to the questions I've asked, I'd give them 100%. Or I give them an A. It does not involve, I don't really think about the character of their, they can be the worst kind of parent, they can be the worst kind of person, but if they write the correct answer, I give them 100%. They are an A student. So in other words, we could be actually harming a lot of people through education if we don't invest in their character. All we have taken is, as somebody said, education is good when it's connected deeply to the personhood, the goodness within a person inside. You can take a person who is stealing nuts and bolts and give him the enough education to make him the cyber thief who can steal millions of dollars internationally. So you can take a local thief and make him an international criminal. So that's unfortunately the downside of education as information, unless there is transformation of the total life of a person. And I think we all have the opportunity to invest more than substantive knowledge, subject, delivery. We can influence them as people. We can talk about leadership, and that's my hope that you would take periodically time to talk about transformation of heart, transformation of life, and be interested in the students. So why I love teaching is not because I love teaching, because I love students, and that's an intention I have placed in my own life. So I want to conclude with this thought about transformational leadership. So who is the transformational leadership? It's really the change of a person who is committed to the change within themselves. They're committed to seeing change. They believe that people can change and transform inside out. In other words, they are concerned about a person's emotions, values, ethics, standards, and the long-term goals of a person. No matter whether you are teaching science or whether you're teaching politics, you want somewhere to be interested in the total person that you are influencing. We become transformational leaders by that, by getting involved in the personhood of others, deals with the intrinsic motivation of the person. You're seeing the person not as somebody who can write question and answers and get 100%. You're looking into their potentials, their inclinations, which of course takes time. So the quick question you asked, that we don't have time for all this, but I think you can. That's what makes us transformational leaders. The time that we have with them, maybe 1 year, we can input into them more than subject knowledge. They will accomplish more than expected if you become interested in the person. And I am positive that many of you are thinking of students whom you have influenced right now, who have come back and said, "Sir, madam, thank you so much. You not only taught me the subject, but you helped me when my family was going through a tough time. When I was going through a tough time, you motivated me. You were there for me. You did not exclude me, but you welcomed me and gave me time." So transformational leaders learn to lead oneself first. We cannot lead others the way we are talking without leading ourselves first. It's a commitment to self-growth and self-leadership. So I think one of the primary ways of leading oneself is to know oneself, is to be self-aware. In sociology, we call this emotional intelligence. In other words, if you suddenly get angry inconsistently with the situation, that anger was triggered by something, but that anger rests in something deep down, what we call is the wounded self. I don't want to go into that, but just to make you aware. So if we become aware that our disproportionate anger has come out from a place that is deeper within our soul, that is self-awareness. We at least know now that it's, why did such a small trigger produce such an outburst of anger? So you become more self-aware through recognizing what is going on the inside. So they lead from heart convictions and value aspirations. In other words, morality-based. I think many of you would believe that there's something that you believe is good and evil. I really hope so, that we are not amoral, which is no morality, but we are all moral. With respect to what religious faith that you may have, we know that there is something good, and if there is something good, there's also, how do you differentiate good unless there is evil? So there is something that says this is good, this is positive, and this is negative. And we lead from that conviction that we want to do the things that are right for the students, inspire others likewise for a common shared goal. Now we think not only good for us, we want to think what is good for the students, what is good for the institution, what is good for our employees. And Sam is a clear example, and I hope he will share. You become a role model. So a transformational leader becomes a role model because they are deeply entrenched in their core values of goodness that they want to impart it to others. And so that comes to the 4 factors of transformational leadership. And they are, as Burns has researched, first of all, individual consideration, idealized influence, intellectual stimulation, inspirational motivation, and individual consideration. And let me briefly talk to you here about this. Idealized influence. it's also called charisma. And people, transformation leaders, develop high moral and ethical values that drive behavior. As I said already, they know what is good and what is the right thing to do. That's what leadership is about, knowing the right thing to do for in all relationships. We can become good parents and good employers and good employees when we are led from deep moral and ethical values. We become a role model for others for organizational behavior. How many of you, when you think of your own institution, you have certain role models, certain professors, certain people whom you consider as good models that you want to become like? That is idealized influence that they have. Cultivate high trustworthiness. They can come, you know that you can go to them. You can trust them. And they communicate clarity of vision and mission for the followers. So at this time, I'm going to invite Sam to talk about in his life, because I know he has a good role model who has influenced his life. And as a so you can look at these, Sam, and you can go one after the other. Who in your life models such a quality? And as a CEO, why is this important? The idealized influence. Why is this important, this role modeling, important to you in your organization? And what are some core values you bring to those 3 companies?
Yeah, so, I was very fortunate to have very strong parents. Both my parents were Christians that grew up as Christians in a Christian home. And my father would always say to me, he says, be focused on the little things and the big things will take care of themselves. Right. So even in the book that I wrote, The First 10 Runs in Singles, that's exactly, kind of the same attitude. Right. If you talk about cricket, in the game of T20, there is a lot of very flashy cricket that is played. But to really build on a firm foundation, right, what my father was teaching me about focusing on the little things and the big things will take care of themselves, right? What a neat way to think about that. So in cricket, he was talking about when I went into bat as a young person, I was 9 years old when I played in my first organized cricket match. He would say to me, son, the first 10 runs in singles. So what he meant was, don't go out there and be flashy, start small. Start small, get used to the environment, get an understanding of what's going on around you, understand the field positions. So very small things that he was talking to me about and to be able to work from that. My mother, who was a teacher, was also somebody who would say, when you're faithful in the little things, she used to say, to whom much is given, much is required. And in the area of education, as I'm talking to educators, all of you are very, very, very well educated. You have had opportunities to learn. You have had opportunities to be able to go to school and to be able to build your own career. And if you think about who you are and what you already have, you have much. And so in that much, you have the ability now to be able to share with your students. One of the things that I learned a lot from my mother and my father, I would say, was preparation. Right? Preparation is important. Preparation for school and for class. Preparation in order to be able to talk to students. I think Suresh spent some time talking about the fact that, we're all individuals and, you may have a class size of 20, you may have a class size of 40, you may have a class size that is much bigger than that. And to be able to talk to a whole class, but then to be able to talk to an individual, I think is 2 different things. And the way that we are able to relate, I believe that yesterday you talked a lot about influence. You talked about the fact that leadership is influence. And in order for us to influence, yes, it's great to be able to talk to a lot of people. But when you call somebody by name, and you can actually relate with them, that goes a whole lot in their life towards, I would say, transformation. So I think Suresh talked about trust. In business, we talk about the speed of trust. Stephen Covey, I think Stephen Covey's son wrote this book called The Speed of Trust, and how important trust is. Trust is important in human relationships, but it's even more important in business. And our word, and being able to talk about our, keeping our word is so important. Recently, I have been working with a lot of banks with regard to, bank loans and stuff like that. One of the most important things when a bank wants to give my company a loan, they look at four things. They look at cash flow, they look at collateral, they look at, one of the important things that they look at is the character of the person that they're lending to. And it's so very important. So they're looking at their character. They look at our credit score, right? So those three things, credit score, they look at our credit score, they look at our cash flow, they look at the collateral we have. These are things that are not subjective. They're very objective. They can be communicated in numbers. But this understanding of character, right, is something that is very subjective, right? Can't necessarily be measured in a number, but they're looking for people who are willing to keep their word. And some of that is also taking responsibility. So when I hire people, I'm always looking for somebody who's worked in a team. I'm looking for people having been an athlete and a sportsman myself. I look for this character, or I look for this ingredient when I hire. I'm looking for somebody who's played a team sport. I look for somebody who takes personal responsibility. Somebody who's willing to put their hand up and said, "Hey, I missed that catch," or I could have run faster. I could have done something. I could have been in a better position to be able to have done something. So as you educate, as you teach people, you are doing that with an end in mind, right? And that is to be able to make sure that these students are going to be, doing even better in many cases than you are. It's one of the most interesting things about a teacher. It was one of the most interesting things about my mother, that she was actually teaching students, and they were going to grow up and to become doctors. They were going to grow up and become college professors. They were going to grow up and be entrepreneurs. And that's a neat thing, right? To be able to actually do your life work in a way that is going to, so that is transformational, right? That you are going to actually teach your students, and they're going to go and even do bigger things than you have been able to do. And so is there anything else that you would want for me to touch on, Suresh, at this point?
I think you have highlighted everything, but what are some of the core values that you bring to your three companies? Can you see the screen?
I would say necessarily not a core value, but people are inspired and will actually follow leaders who have a vision, right? And it's important for us as leaders to have a vision, right? Not only vision that is pie in the sky, but leadership for the next year. As we go into our, in the November, December time period, we are starting to talk about strategic planning. And so, people who are able to, so I think that, people are inspired by people who have vision. I think you talked a little bit about the fact of being self-aware. People are also inspired or motivated, or trust is built with being able to also recognize that there are some weaknesses that we have, and that like one of the things I do is I'm not good at everything, and I have surrounded myself with people that complement me. Not necessarily people who are just like me, but people who complement me, people who are able to disagree with me. And so that makes a strong team, right? You think about a cricket team. You don't want everybody to be the same. You don't want everybody to be a left-arm fast bowler. You don't want everybody to be a right-hand bat. You need diversity, in thought. You need diversity in that team. And so I would say that may not be exactly a core value, but these are the essence of what I would say is required to run a successful company, and to be reflective, right? To be able to say, hey, we said we were going to do this, but we had to do course correction. Flexibility is very important, right? So again, that may not be a core value, but flexibility is important. And those of you who are at this conference today, you have had to be flexible as educators. You're so used to having made eye contact with your students. You may not have even been understood what Zoom was 9 months ago, but all of us have had to get up to speed very quickly in being able to apply technology, not only to apply technology, but to be able to tweak the way that we work during this period. So I would say these are the essence of what I'm looking for in a company as well. People who are adaptive, people who are flexible, people who are willing to listen, but not only to listen, but to be able to, to have a conversation. I don't like people who give me this blank stare and are not able to give something back to me. I love people who are resilient. I love people who have the ability to bounce back. I had a boss who told me that I was like a cat, that I knew how to land on my feet. And if you look at a cat, right, when it jumps, when it falls, it is able to fall on its feet and it's ready to make the next move. And I think that, as we as educators prepare our students for the job market, it's important that not only things like trust, but the ability to be flexible, the ability to be agile, the ability to be self-aware. And self-awareness is not just only to be self-aware, but to be able to say, hey, here are some things that I need to work on, to take personal responsibility. I would say these are all very important skills in the marketplace. It's not only about doing well in school with regard to your grades. Some people would call these soft skills, but these are also very important. And I think that just the fact that you guys are talking about this subject, you're already fully aware and fully understand the need to be able to work on these things as educators, not only to talk about how you educate in the classroom, but education is more than what a student learns in the classroom. Right. And so sometimes it is, being able to, if the school team is playing in a cricket match, I would hope that many of the students, many of the teachers are going to that cricket match, right? Because that's a way to be able to show that, you're somebody that is willing to think outside the box. So there is a great example of thinking outside the classroom. Right? It's getting to know that student in an environment that they are comfortable with. Because what you will find is that, students, and learning and education is not what you only do in the classroom. It's probably one of the reasons I wrote the book that I wrote, because I find myself with my batchmates who did very well in school, but they have real difficult times with things like discernment. I can tell you that my classmates who came in first, second, and third in my class, these guys are doctors. One of them has 3 chairs in England. He's a doctor, has 3 different chairs in teaching medicine. I have another friend of mine, another classmate of mine, who's an anesthesiologist, and is at the top of his game. But as I see them, they don't necessarily have this understanding of discernment, this understanding of what I call in cricket, being able to read the googly, right? That is also important in education, right? It's not only how you do your classwork, but it's also how do you behave outside the classroom. And I would push back and say to you that there is as much learning that we would get on the field of sport as much as we would get in education. Now, that might be a little difficult for some of you to even comprehend, but or not comprehend, but to be able to accept. But I would challenge you with that, to be able to say, hey, be open to that, because different people learn differently.
Thank you, Sam. That was amazing. Yes, yes, and I think you hit on several points there. Flexibility, and especially, as educators, getting interested in our students is a far great influence than just giving them book knowledge. Transfer of book knowledge is, I think, the low level of education, and experiential learning is becoming very popular these days. It's the way that my children didn't want to go to college. I had to force them, because they're saying that we are learning so much through internships and other things, which is, it's just too far right. But I think there is a place where we apply knowledge. And when I was growing up, nobody taught me that you got to apply this. They just said, just mug it up, just learn it by heart and just write it in your exam. And that's the old school of education. But I think I want to apologize. I really want to apologize. I didn't realize that my screen was not shared. So I just want to quickly run through this. So this is. As you've heard right now, all that what Sam and I have shared, let me ask you back the question. Do you really know who you are outside of your positional leadership? So these are the things that I talked about: nature, nurture, culture. And I was thinking that you're watching all this. It would have been funny when I talked about, I'm saying I chose Meghalaya culture. Without sharing the screen, you wouldn't have known what I was talking about. But the globalized culture, and Sam touched on something called agility. Being agile is an important. So the response in volatility is to have a clear vision. When things are volatile, we still need to lead and to uncertain times we need to have understanding. Complex ambiguity, during times of ambiguity, we need to be agile. Sam, could you talk about that? I don't know in what reference you made, but I think that's a very important response in an ambiguous world, in an ambiguous situation.
And I think that this is a strong point. I grew up in Sri Lanka, and like most of you on this call, I think that having grown up in the third world, I think is an awesome thing. I think that the skill sets that we learn in times of scarcity. I remember, having gone through riots in my country when I was, 9, 10 years old, and again at 17, 18 years old. And I think that these are situations and circumstances that shape us, right? They say that necessity is the mother of invention. Later on, Suresh, you talk about innovation, right? And the important thing is to be able to start with what you have. Right, it's very important to start with what you have, especially during this time. It's very easy to be able to focus on what we don't have, right? But for those of us who are leaders, right, a leader doesn't necessarily focus on what they don't have, but they're focusing on what is it that I have, and how am I going to use that to create success for that time. And what does success look like, right? So in times when things are well, when there are calm seas, success looks like one thing. But when there are times of hardship, right? Success looks like getting through that day. Success looks like getting through that week. And so we need to be, as leaders, we need to be able to start to manage and lead with a shorter horizon, right? And so in order to do that, we need to be flexible. And I would argue
Mm.
that because of our upbringing, because of where we've grown up, I think life has already given us the skill sets to be able to navigate these times better than even people who grow up in the West. And I think this is a beautiful thing. And I think that,
Right.
I would say to you that this is our season. This is our season as a people group to be able to embrace the times that we are going through and to be able to use the skill sets that we have learned already and to be able to apply it for success. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the things that I am working with Suresh on in South Asia, because I see that in this region of the world, because of the amount of young people, because of the amount of education that is happening in this country, in these countries, that there is plenty of opportunity for us to be world leaders and world changers in the coming days. I believe that the way that we have
Right.
grown is going to give us an opportunity to be able to navigate these difficult times, right? Because uh, things are not as predictable like in places like in India and Bangladesh and Pakistan and Sri Lanka where we've grown up. So this environment, right, where there has not been as much predictability has already helped us to have home field advantage. In my book, I talk about the home field advantage. I would say to you that we have a good understanding of how to live out life in these times, even though there is pandemics and all that kind of stuff that is going on. I believe that our our environment has already shaped us to be successful during these times.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So you're saying that we have already been we have gone through the hardships. Pandemic is an addition that has come. It's a little more extensive and expansive, but we have been through. We have been through socialism. We have been through, the changes that have happened, the struggles, and so there is a level of resilience within us built in. I think that's what Sam is trying to say, that we can learn from these moments. Maybe some of us should write some insights what we are learning. That's what I did. I sat down and wrote even the things that were happening in the political realm. I have a habit of quiet time in the morning. I pray and then I do some writing. So I wrote 25 leadership insights that I learned from this political turmoil that we have happened. I'm not ready to you know publish it because I want to think through that. But let me just quickly run through. So I talked about trust as a valuable currency, um, um, and integrity. Trust is built on integrity. We becoming integrated in our mind, body, and spirit. Um, and and this is the slide I shared on the transform. And I was thinking you'll have seen this, but how the ugly looking larvae transforms into a beautiful monarch butterfly. But sheds. If you notice, it sheds. It's constantly shedding the old nature. It's shedding, and it's inside the cocoon that it struggles, and they say that the vibrations are so powerful that that's what certain hormones are released that give strength for its wings to fly. And that's an amazing change the morphology of it, the amazing change that happens from within, which becomes beautiful outside. And we talked about the continuum of leadership from laissez-faire to transformational leadership. We don't want to stay in the middle. We want to move forward and become transformational leaders. This is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to move up. We're constantly, as one need is satisfied, we move to the next need. You can't go and talk about self-esteem to a person who's looking for food. It doesn't connect. So that's not his motivation, that he wants to have a high respect. He wants food. That's why he's begging. So we move up this way. And we talked about the difference between transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And these are the things that I talked about. And these are the 4 factors. We talked about idealized influence, being the person is also called charisma, but not in the sense of charismatic, but more in terms of inner character, which we touched upon. High moral and ethical values from within, that people look up to you. You become a role model, and a person of high trust with a clarity of vision and mission. Because when you're inside, when you're clear on the inside, when you're self-aware, I think you can see the world in a better way. You can have a clear vision for what you want to achieve. Okay, let's talk about inspired motivation. Factor number 2, inspired motivation. A transformational leader has high expectations from followers. That's the first thing. So in some sense, I have high expectation from you that you would achieve your total potential, because I choose to see the high potential within every person. And that's how, when you look at your students, you must have the ability to see their potential in what they could become. If I look at the larvae and say, oh, you ugly looking larvae, this is your fate. This is the rest of your life. You're going to be this way. I mean, obviously, for a insect or an animal, it's instinct. It's something within that changes and grows. But we can actually influence people to become a butterfly. We can actually inspire people to go beyond. In fact, sometimes I give additional assignments for students who want to get more than 100%. How can you get more than 100%? But if you want to get 120, you can by writing extra 2 papers or doing some other projects, just so that they can go beyond what is expected of them. And human potential has more. You think of the human brain, it has more capacity than 1 million computers. It has the capacity, but somebody has to turn it on. Somebody has to inspire. Somebody has to light the flame. And you are in a position to light the flame at a young age, at their young age, when they are still forming. The first 14, 15 years of a person's life is formative years, and they get embedded. Now there is proof that actually it embeds and even affects the brain circuitry and things like that. How we connect with students, how we connect with people has the power to change their brain chemistry. It's a book called Anatomy of the Soul by a neuroscientist. Inspired motivation, transformational leaders believe in a strong sense of community. So they not only believe in the individual human potential, but they are also able to see what a group can do. As Sam said, what a team can accomplish is greater than what one person can do. That's why Sam and I have connected together. But what I can accomplish is maybe so much. But together we can scale and imagine if we can believe in our communities to change, if we can believe in a few individuals who will work together. So transformational leaders not only believe in individual potential, but they also believe in collectively what a team can do to accomplish a vision, a shared vision. They believe in the collaboration of teams for a common mission and thereby reduce silo. So I was working for a particular organization recently that every one of us had departments and we were working in silo, which was crazy. We had all had a common mission, but each one was doing their own thing, which is everything to do with leadership. It has got everything to do with leadership, especially executive leadership. I mean, if you don't have a clarity of what we want to accomplish, and you have a team that is working in silo, going in different directions, what are you doing there as a leader? You know, and that's the question I had. In fact, I went and challenged the senior leadership and said, we have a set of values, but each one living our own things and doing, you know, all our different program strategies. So somebody, a transforming leader, fosters, creates the environment for the team to flourish. You can create an environment where individually you delegate things and do their own thing. But you as a leader, if you don't constantly communicate the vision, why do we exist here as an organization? Why do we exist here as a school? What is the mission of the school? What is the vision we have for the community? I hope it's beyond the walls of a college, that you want to influence your community. You want to create jobs. You want to see poverty being alleviated, not just becoming a place of intellectual excellence. You want to, that's a small vision, by the way. That's a small vision. To have a big vision is to see a community transformed, to see Meghalaya, to see India transformed, as Sam talked about, to see a country changed through investing in individual lives, but also in the class as a whole, getting them to do group projects to see how they function as a team, maybe dividing them into two teams and doing it. Create in them you know, of course, cricket is a good way to see a cricket or football or soccer, which is big in Meghalaya, is a good way to bring team spirit. So fostering team spirit among your students, and then system thinking, ability to see the individual part, but also the ability to see the whole. That's you know, we got to be moved from just analytical thinking to systems thinking. Analytical thinking is so like an atomic theory. You kind of break down the atoms smaller and smaller and smaller to see if you can understand the whole. But today that's proved that it's deficient. That's why we have quantum theory, which says, oh, we want to study the relationships between the atoms, between in the subatomic world. What is the relationship? In fact, the string theory is a better theory than the other theories that says there is a connection that gives me the picture of the whole. What is the connection between the parts? And Sam runs an organization called Parts Life. So he knows exactly what the potential of the parts can do to the whole. You know, you have he manufactures certain parts that have become obsolete. He has brought to life certain obsolete parts that instead of throwing away the entire machine, these are military, you know, high performing machines used in, you know, international arena. He makes certain parts that has brought obsolescence back into functionality. And so he knows the functioning of the parts, how to optimize the parts functioning for the better of the whole. And I want Sam to talk about how do you look for potential in people within your organization or elsewhere? What are some ways you create team spirit in your company or companies?
So, again, one of the things that we do is we offer a lot of internships to students during the summer. It's a great way. There are at least three ways that we win by that. The student wins because they have real application, and these are young students. Many of them are 16, 17, 18 years old. So we start to provide internships for children at a very young age, and this kind of helps them even to figure out what they want to study. So we offer internships as a way to not only get people working early, but this way we are able to observe their potential and to see in them. We do some testing. We use something called a DISC profile that looks at a person around 4 different behavioral characteristics around the area of dominance, influence, steadiness, and conformance. And there is no low score here. It's all, it's not that if you get a low score in dominance that that you don't fit in the organization. It's just a good way for us to be able to make sure that we are putting people in the right place, right? In a cricket team, you want to make sure that you're putting people in the right place. You talked about football. In football, right, you want to make sure that, you want to have somebody who kicks with his left foot, right, on the right side of, you want them on the left side of the field, not on the right side of the field. So it's just very important to make sure that you're positioning people correctly for success. And so, so we do some testing, we observe people in how they are doing in their work, even during internship periods. And this is a great way for us to actually look for potential in people. And then our young people, including my own son who just came to work for us, we are challenging them early. We're not waiting for them to spend 2-3 years in the company before we challenge them. In some cases, we are actually putting them in places where they will fail fast, right? Because we want them to be able to come up with adversity fairly soon. We do not wait and try to coddle people. I like to expose them into the fire a little bit so that we can figure out, kind of how they're made, how they're going to, how resilient are they in being able to handle success? How resilient are they in being able to actually even fail, right? I teach something called failing fast in the area of innovation. It's also true, with regard to people and tasks, right? You want to be able to give people, test them early so that you kind of know how you need to work with them, right? And so I don't necessarily consider a failure. I think somebody said very early that failure is not failure if you actually learn from it, right? So, we are a very learning organization. I try to make sure that I commit to people, and then we have to lead through failure with regard to our people. And you're asking about how do we build team spirit. We play sports a lot. Even during COVID, we had organized a softball game where many showed up, and I saw a lot of camaraderie, but I saw a very competitive spirit during that during that event, and that challenged me as a leader to say, wow, I have some real human capital here that I need to channel. I can't hold these people back as a leader. My responsibility is not to organize them so much that they don't have the ability to compete. They don't have the ability to be able to show off some of that aggression, not only on the sports field, but at work. And so it really challenged my own thinking to say, hey, I got to create more pathways in order to be able to even tap into more of my people's competitive spirit. So, these are the ways that I feel like, as leaders, it's our responsibility to be able to open things up. And, some of what I'm saying could be very challenging to do in a very structured educational setting. So I recognize that. My mother was a teacher, and she was somebody who was, she was ahead of her time. Headmaster was very, very old school. He wanted things done a certain way, and it's very difficult, when the head of the school doesn't necessarily have vision. There are, unfortunately, in education, you have people who are just, they just wanna, it's the same old thing day after day after day. And so my heart goes out to those of you who may be in that situation, because it's very difficult for you to be transformational if your leader doesn't have vision. But, this is, I'm talking about 35, 40 years ago. God willing, educational institutions have come to recognize that in order for us to be able to meet the needs of the marketplace, that we need leaders who have vision, who have the flexibility and the agility that we are talking about. But hopefully I'm connecting to my audience and you're understanding kind of what I'm saying. And I think even in the US, I think the educational institutions that are doing well are those that listen to their customer. I'm on a board of a university, a college close by. They have about probably between 5,000 and 8,000 students. Most of them are in remote learning today. One thing I would tell you about this college is that they do a good job of going out to industry and building relationships and partnerships with industry as a way to be able to get good feedback on what the product needs to look like, right? Because today, unlike when education was many, many years ago, the means to an end, when we talk about what does success look like getting these students ready for the marketplace, right? Because as we think about that, as we get a good understanding of what success looks like for students, that in itself helps us to be transformational, right? Because Stephen Covey talks about, start with the end in mind, right? So you have to think in terms of your class and say, what is the end in mind? What is it that I'm doing with these students? And how am I preparing them, to become adults that are able to change, to be world changers, right? And so as we think like that, I think it'll give us as educators the energy, the freshness, the juice that we need in order to be able to, to come to that classroom prepared, to be able to think in terms of, hey, how am I going to inspire these people, right? One of the things that I am taking a class in right now is how to tell a good story, right? Because telling a good story is going to help these students, start to thinking, because you're going to be able to captivate your students, right? And it's just very important for us to continue to work on our own game, right? So yes, our responsibility is towards our students, but I would say as leaders, what are we doing? And I'm glad I'm speaking to the choir here, because at 6 o'clock, you're using your own time to be able to learn. So I congratulate you for wanting to understand and be challenged by new information as to how you could be transformational in the classroom.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate those. A lot of good words there. And I want to echo what Sam has said. Thank you for taking the time to be here. And this is what motivates Sam and I, to see professionals who are going beyond the call of duty to wanting to learn and grow. And I really hope that several things that he had mentioned, I think one is observing. I think if you can observe your student in the way he or she should go, the gifts and potential in the person, and think beyond and have a vision for their future. And it's often hard. I think you can build that into your curriculum. I don't know what kind of flexibility you have, but I want to speak to the principals and those who are in places of authority that flexibility. We talked about flexibility, uh, giving without compromising on the educational component, the program objectives and the course objectives. There's always a way to think out of the box for the sake of the students. You know, in how you prepare your syllabus for teaching. If you make it more experiential, I think that's what we're trying to say. And pay attention to students who, uh, in the way they should go, and go beyond the giving them. There is limitation of how much we can do, but if we can even invest in a few students who are showing interest, that's going to be worth. It's going to be transformative for them, and through that, it will also bring transformation to your life. We want to talk about the third factor, the intellectual stimulation, which basically is the idea that what we were talking. It's a good segue into that. The idea that the transformational leaders tap into they believe in the creativity of human brain. They believe that students you can release their creativity, the juice to flow in them, to innovate and to think outside of the box, to critically think. You know, that's one thing I love about the Western education is it's given me the power. It's empowered me to think critically, to disagree with this, to think through why is this, you know, having done a lot of studies in India, you know, the critical thinking was not part of the way I was examined. You know, it just content was, I had to vomit back the content, which is the crude way of saying it. But in reality, I feel like that education didn't do much good to me. But able to critically think as a to be creative and innovative. Now it's me because now I prepare the syllabuses for my students. You know, I just finished teaching. Majority of the grade was for the practice of the certain concepts that I was teaching. So, in order, if you're teaching sociology and you pick a problem on why there is poverty, you ask students to go out into the community and say, what is causing poverty? Instead of just theories of poverty, you're using their brain to apply and see if the concept they're learning is true or not. So you can do for any subject for that matter. And collaborating with companies, as Sam rightly said, doing all this so that they can be job ready. So you have that in mind. The preparation for them to study biology, you know, zoology was my, I did my major chemistry. I had the opportunity to go into some institutes where they were doing some research and study how the system works, or do an internship. You can learn that, and as principals, you have the opportunity to create those environments. So I'm going to foster innovation and out of the box thinking. And so I'm going to ask to talk about that briefly. How do you give? Can you share an example where you have allowed or fostered creativity and innovation to solve any particular issue within an organization? Or it doesn't have to be for a problem. How you have allowed creativity or innovation to help. Why is this critical for your particular?
Yes. So I think, you know, again, we have a very structured environment. One of the things that I teach is something called creativity before capital, right? A lot of people, you know, whether in an organization, they're constantly looking to see, you know, they think that the money or the budget is the thing that they're going to need in order to be creative. And one of the things that I always push back is, hey, let's start with what we have, and use our mind. I had a leader, who I worked for a very long time. He's a very famous industrialist, who would tell me, it's an idea problem, not a money problem, right? And so many times people are looking at saying, hey, how do I spend money as a way to be able to solve this problem? But God has given every one of us a brain, and it's our responsibility to be able to use it. And so I'm constantly motivating people to be able to think of an idea on how we can improve things. We created, one of the things that we do is we actually work on something called a value stream map as a way to be able to brainstorm, right? So we use this process, a brainstorming process. I believe it's called a mind map, right? It's to be able to take our thinking and in a very collaborative environment, be able to put it out in a map. It's called a mind map. It's very, very simple. You can, use Microsoft to be able to do that, to get our thinking out there. Sometimes we use stickies, these yellow stickies that are made famous by 3M as a way to be able to do some brainstorming. So, so that it's not permanent, but you're putting your ideas out there. And so you have a brainstorming session as a way to be able to get all of that stuff that we are thinking about onto a piece of paper. And then many times, even in our strategic planning process, we do that as a way to say, hey, there are no bad ideas. Let's get every idea that we have as a team out on a board. And we're using stickies in order to be able to do that. And sometimes then we say, okay, we don't have the capacity to work on all of these ideas, but how do we work on taking those big ideas and then being able to filter it through a process by saying, hey, I think these are the important things that we need to work on. So, these are the ways that we make sure that we allow every single person on the team to be able to think about stuff, and then to be able to have a part in the big plan, right? Because what this does is it brings ownership into the process. And then we also do some rewards, like, we have these little gift cards that we give people, when they have a good idea, when they have prevented, let's say that there was a safety issue and a person spoke up and did something about it. We do some instant gratification, some instant rewards as a way to be able to reinforce that particular decision. So in an educational environment, it could be that you allow a student, to miss an assignment because of something that they did. So, again, we have to take, what we are talking about and be able to apply it in that particular situation. I have a daughter who's in middle school. She has a free homework pass, so there are times when she's able to use that as a way to not do her homework, right? Here's a very creative way of being able to reward good behavior by saying, hey, because you've been doing so well, I'm going to give you an ability to get a pass in doing your homework, or not turning in an assignment because you're doing so well. So again, I think that we need to understand our audience. We need to understand how we will need to motivate students, and then be able to go ahead and do that. So and I think that creativity and innovation are very, very important, in the workplace, because if I am only dependent on leadership or on myself and what I bring to the table, we would be a very stagnant company. And in order for us to grow, we need more people to be able to think. So I tell people, we have some very sophisticated machines, but I tell people all the time, listen, I'm not interested in your hands. I'm not interested in what you can do for us physically. I'm more interested in what you bring to the table in your thinking. So it's a way for us to continue to engage people, but I can tell you that we have a long way to go even in industry, in being able to engage more people. I think these things take time, but it's a journey, right? It's the continuous improvement process, and we need a way to be able to continue to capture ideas, to be able to use those ideas, and to be able to reinforce that behavior so that people feel the ownership and take ownership in the work that they do.
So much, Sam. That was very insightful. I have seen the note here. I just saw the chat. I've not been following the chat here, but I see that we can stop here. We've not completed our time, and I apologize for not being able to share the screen well. Sunny, are you here? If you want to open up for some for us,
Yeah,
please. How do you plan to do it?
right. Thank you so much. I mean, a lot of insights that we have, especially on, some of the keywords here on trust and relationship. And in fact, to really transit from transactional approach to transformational approach, and to really be that inspired person. We talk about motivation, but inspired motivation is one keyword. Many of us lead, but we don't even have a vision and really don't know where we lead. But I think a lot to chew on, a lot of takeaways from here, and I'm sure that a lot of soul searching and mind searching as well. At this point of time, I know it'll be incomplete if I don't give this opportunity to ask, to allow all of you participants to ask questions for Sam and for Dr. Suresh. So two options here. You can just unmute yourself and directly ask a question. You can address to Dr. Suresh or Mr. Sam. Also, if you find it uncomfortable to speak on a microphone, you can always chat, and we can take it up to the resource person. So at this point of time, I'll open the floor for all of you participants to ask your doubts or your questions. So it's over to you participants to ask questions.